I have 5 children, but nobody visits me. Rose Thompson's voice was barely above a whisper as she sat across from Elvis Presley in the recreation room of Sunset Manor Nursing Home. At 89 years old, her hands were weathered and shaking, but her eyes still held the sharp intelligence of someone who had lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and raised 5 children as a single mother after her husband died young. I gave them everything, she continued, her voice breaking slightly. I worked 3 jobs to put them through school, never missed a birthday or graduation, taught them right from wrong. But now, she gestured around the sterile room filled with other elderly residents, most of whom sat in silence, staring at nothing. Now I might as well be invisible. What Elvis was about to discover would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, family, and what happens when the people who gave you everything become inconvenient reminders of your obligations. But to understand the full tragedy of Rose Thompson's situation, you need to know about the life she had built and lost, and how a woman who had been the center of 5 children's worlds had somehow become a stranger they were too busy to visit. Rose Thompson had not always been the forgotten woman in room 237 of Sunset Manor. There was a time when she had been the heart and soul of a bustling household on Maple Street in Memphis, where her 5 children, Robert, Patricia, Michael, Susan, and David, had grown up in a home filled with the sounds of laughter, arguments, homework discussions, and the constant activity of a large family making their way in the world. Rose had married young to Harold Thompson, a kind man who worked as an electrician and shared her dream of having a big family. They had been happy in those early years, watching their children come into the world one by one, each birth bringing new joy and new challenges. Harold had been a devoted father who came home from work each day, eager to hear about his children's adventures, to help with homework, and to tuck them into bed with stories and songs. But life, as Rose had learned too young, doesn't always follow the plans we make. When Robert was 12, Patricia was 10, Michael was 8, Susan was 6, and David was just 4 years old. Harold Thompson suffered a massive heart attack while rewiring a house downtown. He died on the way to the hospital, leaving Rose with 5 young children to raise alone and almost no money to do it with. What happened next defined not just Rose Thompson's character, but the entire trajectory of her family's life. At 28 years old, with no college education and no family nearby to help, Rose could have easily given in to despair or given up her children to relatives who might have been better equipped to care for them financially. Instead, she made a decision that would shape the next 20 years of her life. She would do whatever it took to keep her family together and give her children the opportunities Harold would have wanted them to have. The sacrifices Rose made in those years were extraordinary, even by the standards of single mothers in the 1940s and 1950s. She worked as a seamstress during the day, taking in additional piecework in the evenings after the children were in bed. On weekends, she cleaned houses for wealthy families in East Memphis, often bringing her younger children with her because she couldn't afford a babysitter. When money was particularly tight, Rose would skip meals to make sure her children had enough to eat, telling them she wasn't hungry when the truth was there simply wasn't enough food for 6 people. But Rose's sacrifices went beyond the financial. She gave up any possibility of remarriage, turning down several suitors over the years because she was afraid that bringing a stepfather into the house might disrupt the stability she was working so hard to create for her children. She had no social life, no hobbies, no time for herself. Her entire existence revolved around making sure Robert, Patricia, Michael, Susan, and David had everything they needed to succeed. And succeed they did. Robert, the eldest, became an engineer and moved to Chicago, where he married and started his own family. Patricia became a teacher and settled in Atlanta with her husband and 3 children. Michael followed his father's path into electrical work but expanded it into his own contracting business in Nashville. Susan became a nurse and moved to Dallas, where she worked in a major hospital and raised 2 daughters. David, the youngest, pursued his love of music and became a successful session musician in Los Angeles. By any measure, Rose Thompson had been an extraordinary mother. She had taken 5 children who could have easily become statistics fatherless kids from a poor family in 1940s Memphis and helped them all become successful, productive adults with families of their own. She had given them values, education, opportunities, and most importantly, the unshakable knowledge that they were loved and capable of achieving anything they set their minds to. But somewhere along the way, as her children built their own lives and pursued their own dreams, Rose had gradually become less central to their world. It started innocently enough: phone calls that came less frequently as work demands increased, visits that were shortened due to busy schedules, holidays that were sometimes skipped because of conflicting obligations with in-laws or work commitments. Rose had understood, or at least tried to understand. She had raised her children to be independent, to pursue their dreams wherever those dreams might lead them. She was proud of their success, proud that they had built good lives for themselves and their families. But understanding why the distance had grown didn't make it hurt any less. The transition to Sunset Manor had happened gradually, then all at once. First, Rose had fallen and broken her hip at age 85, requiring a lengthy rehabilitation that she couldn't afford to do at home with no one available to care for her. Then there had been the mini-stroke that left her slightly confused and unsteady on her feet. Finally, there had been the incident where she had left the stove on and nearly started a fire, prompting a family conference call where her children had decided, with the best of intentions, that she needed professional care. The decision had been made logically, practically, and with genuine concern for Rose's safety. But it had also been made without really consulting Rose about what she wanted or needed. Her children had visited during the first few months, bringing flowers and reassurances that they would see her soon. But soon had gradually become when we can, then sometime next month, and finally, for most of them it had become an uncomfortable silence punctuated by guilt-ridden phone calls on birthdays and holidays. This was the woman Elvis encountered on a December afternoon in 1976, when he had come to Sunset Manor to visit with elderly residents as part of his quiet charitable work that few people knew about. Elvis had always felt a special connection to older people, perhaps because his own grandmother had played such an important role in his life, or perhaps because he understood what it felt like to be surrounded by people who wanted something from you but didn't necessarily see you as a complete human being. What he hadn't expected was to meet someone whose story would so profoundly impact his understanding of what success really meant, and what obligations came with the love that had shaped all their lives. "Tell me about your children," Elvis said gently after Rose had made her devastating confession about having 5 children who never visited. He had learned over the years that sometimes the best way to help someone was simply to listen to their story. Rose's face lit up for the first time since Elvis had sat down with her. "Oh, they're all so successful," she said with genuine pride that was both heartbreaking and admirable. "Robert is an engineer in Chicago. He designed bridges, you know. Important bridges that thousands of people drive over every day. And Patricia, my Patricia, teaches 3rd grade in Atlanta. She's been Teacher of the Year 3 times. She has the most beautiful way with children." As Rose continued describing her children's accomplishments, Michael's contracting business, Susan's nursing career, David's music success, Elvis began to understand the complex tragedy of her situation. This wasn't a case of ungrateful children who had forgotten a neglectful mother. This was a woman who had successfully raised 5 accomplished adults who had simply become so absorbed in their own lives that they had lost sight of the person who had made their success possible. "They sound like wonderful people," Elvis said, and he meant it. "You must have done something very right as a mother to raise 5 children who all turned out so well." Rose's smile faltered slightly. "I tried my best," she said quietly. "I made a lot of mistakes along the way. I was probably too strict sometimes, too worried about money, too focused on making sure they had opportunities that I never had. Maybe I didn't show them enough affection, or maybe I showed them so much that they got tired of it. I don't know. All I know is that I spent 40 years of my life making sure they had everything they needed, and now I can't figure out what I did wrong that made them not want to see me." It was in that moment that Elvis realized Rose Thompson's story wasn't just about one family's dysfunction. It was about a much larger problem in American society. The way success often meant leaving behind the people and places that had nurtured that success, and how easy it was to mistake geographic distance and busy schedules for emotional distance and neglect. That evening, Elvis made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events that would not only reunite the Thompson family, but would also create a new model for how successful people could maintain meaningful connections with the parents who had sacrificed everything to give them opportunities. Elvis began by doing something that Rose's children probably should have thought to do years earlier. He asked Rose to tell him her whole story. Not just the story of being a mother to 5 children, but the story of Rose Thompson, the person first, her dreams, her fears, her experiences during some of the most challenging periods in American history. What he learned over the next several hours was that Rose Thompson was not just a forgotten elderly woman in a nursing home. She was a living library of American experience, a woman who had witnessed and participated in the great social and economic changes of the 20th century. Someone whose insights and wisdom were being lost simply because no one was taking the time to listen. Rose had lived through the Great Depression as a child, had come of age during World War II, had raised a family during the social upheavals of the 1950s and 1960s. She had worked in industries that no longer existed, had lived through segregation and integration, had watched Memphis transform from a small southern city into a major metropolitan area. She had stories about neighbors who became lifelong friends, about community celebrations that brought entire neighborhoods together, about the ways people supported each other during difficult times. More importantly, she had insights about parenting, about marriage, about work, about community that came from decades of experience and reflection. She had learned lessons about resilience, about sacrifice, about love that could benefit not just her own children, but anyone who took the time to hear them. As Elvis listened to Rose's stories, he began to formulate a plan that would address not just her immediate loneliness, but the broader problem of families that had been scattered by success and geography. He was going to bring the Thompson family back together, but he was going to do it in a way that would help them understand not just what they owed their mother, but what they were missing by not maintaining a real relationship with her. The first step was reaching out to Rose's children, something that required a delicate touch. Elvis understood that these were successful, busy people who probably felt guilty about not visiting their mother more often, but who had also probably developed their own narratives about why the distance existed and why it wasn't entirely their fault. Elvis started with Robert, the eldest son and engineer in Chicago. The initial phone call was awkward. Robert was clearly surprised to hear from Elvis Presley, and suspicious about why someone famous was calling him about his mother. But Elvis was patient, explaining that he had met Rose during a visit to the nursing home, and had been moved by her stories about her family. "She talks about you all the time," Elvis told Robert. "She's so proud of your work, so proud of what you've accomplished. But she misses you. She misses all of you. And I think you might be missing out on something important too." The conversation that followed was revealing. Robert wasn't a bad son or an ungrateful person. He was a man in his 50s who worked 60-hour weeks, who had his own family responsibilities, and who had gradually allowed the physical distance between Chicago and Memphis to become emotional distance as well. He sent money regularly to help pay for his mother's care. He called on birthdays and holidays. He thought he was being a responsible son, but when Elvis asked when Robert had last had a real conversation with his mother, not a quick check-in call, but a genuine talk about her life, her experiences, her thoughts, Robert couldn't remember. And when Elvis asked what Robert knew about his mother's life before he was born, or about her experiences as a young widow raising 5 children alone, Robert realized that despite living with her for 18 years, he had never really asked his mother to tell him her story. Similar conversations with Patricia, Michael, Susan, and David revealed the same pattern. These were all loving, successful people who had somehow never learned to see their mother as a complete person with her own history, wisdom, and insights. They had frozen her in their minds as mom, the person who took care of them, who worried about them, who was always there when they needed her. But they had never developed an adult relationship with Rose Thompson, the individual. Elvis's plan for bringing the family back together was both simple and profound. He arranged for all 5 Thompson children to come to Memphis for what he told them would be a special Christmas celebration for their mother. But instead of a traditional family reunion, Elvis organized something that had never been done before. A formal interview session where Rose would tell her life story to her children, guided by questions that would help them understand not just her role as their mother, but her identity as a person who had lived through extraordinary times and learned valuable lessons. The reunion took place in a private room at Peabody Hotel, decorated with flowers and comfortable seating, arranged so that Rose would be at the center, surrounded by her 5 children who had traveled from across the country to be there. Elvis served as the moderator, asking questions that encouraged Rose to share stories her children had never heard. What happened over the course of that afternoon was transformational for the entire Thompson family. Robert learned that his mother had always been interested in engineering and had encouraged his interests because she understood the precision and creativity required. Patricia discovered that her mother's teaching philosophy had been shaped by her own experiences as a child during the Depression, when good teachers had made the difference between hope and despair. Michael heard stories about his father's electrical work that gave him a new appreciation for both his parents' values and his own career choice. Susan learned that her mother's emphasis on caring for others had been shaped by her experiences as a young widow who had relied on the kindness of neighbors and community members. And David discovered that his mother's love of music came from her own father, Rose's dad, who had played guitar and taught her songs that she had then sung to her own children during difficult times. But perhaps most importantly, all 5 children learned that their mother had dreams, fears, disappointments, and wisdom that went far beyond her role as their parent. They learned that she had opinions about current events, insights about relationships, and perspectives on life that could benefit their own families and careers. The impact of this reunion was immediate and lasting. Robert began calling his mother weekly, not just to check on her health but to ask her advice about work challenges and to share stories about his own children. Patricia started bringing her students' artwork to show Rose during visits, creating a connection between Rose's teaching insights and Patricia's current classroom challenges. Michael began including Rose in discussions about his business decisions, discovering that her experiences managing household finances during difficult times had given her a sophisticated understanding of budgeting and risk management. Susan found that Rose's experiences caring for sick neighbors and family members had taught her practical nursing skills that were still valuable today.